So thanks, Elizabeth. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our amazing guest speaker tonight, Dorit Oliver-Wolff. So Dorit was recently awarded the British Empire Medal for her services to Holocaust education and awareness. So she's been talking in schools, community groups, and businesses about her experiences for more than a decade. As you'll hear during Dorit's presentation, she was born in Novi Sad in Serbia, formerly Yugoslavia. And at the outbreak of the war, she and her mother fled, traveling from place to place within Hungary, creating new identities before hiding in a cellar. So after the Holocaust, she was awarded a scholarship to a music academy, went on to become a famous jazz and blues singer and pin-up model in Germany. So it's safe to say that she's had quite an incredible and unique life. Also, the details of which she's shared with us in her book, From Yelp Star to Pop Star, which I have with me here. If any of you are interested in buying Dorit's book, you can access this via print on demand, or if you send us an email at bhasblog@gmail.com, we can provide you with Dorit's email address and you can send her a check. She'll send a signed copy back to you. So that's $10.99, including postage and packaging for Dorit's book and a signed copy. So without further delay, we'll begin with a brief introductory video. Then we'll hear from Dorit directly. Again, if you just ensure that you remain muted for the duration of the talk, type any questions you have into the chat box, and we will ask Dorit these questions at the end. So Elizabeth, if you could please start the video.
Yeah.
Well, tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, a time to remember the millions of Jews who died at the hands of the Nazis.
Oops.
Elizabeth, you've muted yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realise that would happen.
It's me singing.
A former pop star visits your school. Dorit Oliver-Wolff has come to St Paul's Catholic College in Burgess Hill to talk about her life. But her journey to get here is extraordinary.
And this was one of the songs that I sang in 1961. That was my first hit.
Her childhood was a world away from the students listening today. Hers is a remarkable tale of war, near death, glitz and glamour. Dorit was a young Jewish girl, just 5 years old and living in Hungary when the Nazi regime started to spread across Europe.
You know about the Holocaust? And I wish I wouldn't.
Originally from Yugoslavia, Dorit and her family fled Belgrade when war broke out, but they were split up and she and her mother found themselves in Hungary.
When you were running and hiding from the Germans, where was your father? Did you ever know?
My father was taken into a forced labor camp where they were hacking stones. I don't think my father even had a duster in his hand ever before. By the time he was 30, he was worked to death.
Dorit and her mother spent the entire war in Hungary, where anti-Semitism was rife.
One day we were walking to a park. Budapest is full of beautiful parks. And when a big fat blonde woman crossed the road, looking me straight, walking towards me like that, and I was a tiny little girlie, she spat in my eyes and called me Bido Žido, which means stinking Jew. And I didn't understand how you assimilate stinking Jew. Why do I have to be stinking if you are Jewish?
There was mounting hatred towards the Jewish people. Millions were sent to concentration camps, so Dorit's mother decided they would hide the fact they were Jews.
My mother refused to wear, or let us wear, the yellow Star of David because my mother suddenly reinvented herself and became a Red Cross nurse. But that was a very good disguise, if you like.
Constantly on the run and in fear of being found out, they moved from house to house. But a neighbour realised Dorit was Jewish, and one day while her mother was at work, she was caught and put into a sorting house for concentration camps. She spent over 2 months there on her own.
One lady there, I don't remember her name, at night, and I was crying because I missed my mum. She would take me into her arms, and she comforted me. And one day, they took her as well, because the soldiers used to come in and you, and they went, and they never came back. She never came back.
With the help of a guard, Dorit escaped and was reunited with her mother. They fled to another city in Hungary, Pécs, not knowing that the Nazis had captured thousands of Jews there, and they were soon arrested. While her mother was questioned, Dorit confronted her captors.
I got up, went to the desk, pointed at the photo frame. Are these your children? And he said, yes, they are my 2 daughters. They must be the same age as you are. Oh. And then I said to him, are you going to hurt my mummy? He said, Scheiße. He went around, beckoned my mother out. She said, come here. And she says, not all of us Germans are nasty swines. And this is why I try to believe that there must be a little bit of good in people. And I like to believe that not every person who sent these people to the gas chamber enjoyed it.
Having narrowly escaped death twice, Dorit's ordeal wasn't over. As a homeless refugee who'd had little food, when the war ended, 9-year-old Dorit weighed less than 3 stone. But it was singing that kept her going.
When I was afraid and I was alone, hidden somewhere, I sang. And when I was hungry, I would invent and sing songs. And all I ever wanted to do is really become a singer one day.
Oh, yes. After the war, Dorit went on to study at the University of Munich, where she sang in jazz clubs. She was discovered by the North German Broadcasting Company and was signed to a record label. Suddenly, Germany couldn't get enough of her. On a night blue autumn weekend.
Many of the young German Air Force had me as a pin-up in their lockers. And everywhere was my picture. And I thought, my hand, do they know that I'm Jewish? It was a funny feeling, you know, but it was the day I became their pin-up.
And as their pin-up, Dorit was invited to sing at a concert for the airmen and their families.
I peeked through the curtains. The women had the most elegant evening dresses on, but the gentlemen had the uniforms on. I thought I'm not going to be able, because suddenly it was not an audience anymore. There were the German soldiers there. And as a finale, I said, and now I'm going to choose a very special song for me, which is Havana Gila, which is a Hebrew song. They all got up and sang the song and clapped their hands. And I just had this amazing feeling of triumph. And when I sang, and I remember putting my arms up and thinking, I made it. You didn't manage to kill me. You killed all my family. But you made me a star. That was, I think, one of the most remarkable and memorable shows that I ever had.
Dorit moved to England with her husband in 1962. She was convinced she would have the freedom to live the life she chose here, and also the freedom to tell her story.
It was just generally really interesting to hear about how someone can survive something like that.
She didn't have any anger about it. She more or less was more passionate about it and her experiences, and I thought she spoke really well.
Dorit's written her memoirs, and she hopes they can serve as a reminder of a chapter of history she thinks should never be forgotten.
I just feel that there are so many people that I would like to tell them, look, there am I went through this and I have seen that, but there is life after it. Make the best of it that you can. It's not that I want to remember, believe me. I just cannot forget.
Well, this is a little bit about me, so it will give you the chance to think a little bit, because otherwise, if you would have had to hear it all from me, we would have to sit here for the whole night and next day and next day. So here I am in Eastbourne. And as I said, it's not that I sit here every day and let's think about it. Many of the things I have forgotten, even more, I want to forget. But unfortunately, in this life, it doesn't work like that. Because the smallest thing can trigger off a memory, a smell. You read something, you see something, and bang, you're back again in this horrible place where the Nazis were trying to sniffle out everywhere that there was a Jew. And being Jewish was not exactly a popular thing to be. And you just don't understand, what have you done to deserve this? I was a little child. I didn't even know that I was Jewish because we were not brought up in a very religious family. You know what I mean? We were born then in Yugoslavia, and unless you were religious, you all went to the church or you went to the synagogue, but it was not one of the things that was saying, oh, good afternoon, I'm Jewish. It was irrelevant. You were my next door neighbor. So once they started to collect the Jewish people, doesn't matter what, you suddenly found the question, whether it was the children didn't really understand it, but the grown-ups must have asked, what have we done? Why? So I'm dedicating the rest of my life before I kick the bucket to be able to share my experiences with anybody who wants it, especially the younger people, because I am convinced if we are trying to teach the young people how to make things better today, we will all have a better tomorrow. Without knowing and understanding what has happened, we cannot know what we are going to stop, because basically you are all educators, more or less. In my experience, there is no child that is born with hate. Babies are not born with hate, are they? They learn it from the parents, from the brothers, sisters, people. So a child is at least 2 or 3 years old because before she or he understands that somebody is different from them. And then if the parents teach them that anti-Semitism, or the Jews are this, or the Muslims are that, then they start sort of to get influences, but they don't really understand. But by teaching them, and us, the Holocaust survivors, it's not many of us left now, by the way, which you can imagine. And there are also quite a few people who just don't know how to or don't want to talk about it. But there are quite a few of us left who are sharing and are very privileged to be able to pass on our experiences so that people, and the young people especially, should really understand. I cannot give you a history lesson because I was too young to remember. I can only share with you my experiences and what I went through. Behind the story also, if you have got a dream or something that you particularly want to do, go for it. Never give up. There's always hope. So even this coronavirus, at least it's not anti-Semitic. That's my only, I always say to my friends, it's horrible, but it's not only for the Jews. So in Israel, they also have got it. That was a funny joke, but I feel like it. I don't like to be singled out. I like to be liked or disliked for the person I am, but not because I'm Jewish or because I would be another religion. I want people to make up their mind. If I have got a character or personality that you don't want to like, I can be the Pope's auntie and I would still be a nasty cow. So that doesn't matter. All I'm trying to say to is don't judge people before you know about them, learn about them. Now I'm going to show you my little PowerPoint. I call it. I'm hopeless with this click here, click there. And I'm a people's person. I like to look into people's eyes when I talk to them, but now I'm looking in your eyes as well. So this is against all odds. We survived against all odds. And now it should come on. Oh, it does. You saw this picture already. That was me before I was about two years old. I was an average little girl with a very pretty mum. And my mother at that time was a ballet teacher, and she was teaching art and ballet in the court of Yugoslavia to King Peter and his. So I was 4 years old when I had my first debut, and I already enjoyed the stage. So that's where I caught the bug. That was before the war. Click. This, we skipped, this was my 5th birthday. And if you see this little cake in the back there, on my right-hand side, there was a little cake which my auntie made. And that was the last cake for about 4 or 5 years that I have ever seen or eaten. Because my birthday was in January, and on 4th of April, the war broke out. So I was just about 5 years old. And in the night before the bomb started, people went on the streets and they were shouting, "Bolje rat nego pakt," which means better to have a war than a pact with Germany. And the next day, bombs were flying. Whole of Belgrade was flattened because the Germans understood that better war, so let the Serbian people know about it. So nobody was prepared for that. And of course, 4 o'clock in the morning, most people were in bed sleeping. When this place was bombarded, the houses started to burn. My mother and I tried to get out of the block of flats. There were about 20 flats. And we could hardly get out of the burning house. And when we did get out, there was like a stampede. But except this stampede was not by buffaloes, like in one of those country and westerns. There were people. And they were stampeding, they were just running all in one direction to get out of Belgrade. Eventually, when we got out of Belgrade, into the forest, into the woods, there were the partisans waiting. And we all who escaped the burning city, we had or nighties or pajamas on. April in Yugoslavia is freezing. It's like in Switzerland, like in a skiing resort. It was absolutely freezing, but we were running and we were afraid. So I don't even think in those moments we thought of the cold. We just wanted to escape, not to die in the bombs. Can you click now? So because my mother and my grandmother, they were both born in Hungary, my mother came to Yugoslavia because she married my dad. So they decided we are not going to go back to Belgrade. We were going to escape to Budapest because Hungary in those days had a good relationship with the Germans. This was me. I was here almost 6 years old. This is when I arrived in Budapest. When we arrived in Budapest, my mother straight away got a job as a teacher, and we had a nice little flat. And my mother then went back as we were running away from Belgrade. She discovered that my mother's sister-in-law and her new baby didn't make it to the woods. So she got back and brought them with her. She was very brave. So it was then my grandma, my mom, my auntie, and my little cousin. And so we took off to Budapest. As we arrived there, we all lived naturally together. As there were no food on the way, my little cousin Zora, she was only 1 month old. So my auntie would pump out a little bit of the breast milk to give it to me so I wouldn't starve. I must tell you, it was a horrible, horrible smell. But rather than dying from hunger, I thought if my little cousin, she can have it and she didn't feel sick, I'll have a bit of that. Since then, my auntie always used to call me that I was her firstborn. And of course, I suppose if you drink somebody's milk, you feel somehow a bond to her. So anyway, so we ended up in Budapest, and we all lived in a one-room flat because we couldn't afford much more. But families in those days liked to live together. One day, my mother and I went to a park, which you heard in the other story, and this great big woman looked at me, spat at me. I'm looking at this picture and I don't think it's written Jew on it anywhere, but she figured out that I must have been Jewish and she spat at me and she called me Büdös Zsidó, which means stinking Jew. And in the same moment, I was surprised that my mother didn't get there and whacked her once in the mouth. My mother was Hungarian and very feisty, temperamental young woman. But she must have known that this was very dangerous because instead of kicking her in the shins or somewhere else, my mother just grabbed my hand so strong. I honestly thought she's going to break it. We turned around and on the way out of the park towards the home, the proverbial hit the fan because suddenly from out of nowhere, there were big flags of the swastika and there were people shouting, get rid of the Jews, they caused us to be jobless, take the money because this is our money. And the poor Jews on the streets were running and there were great big posters on the buses with horrendous caricatures of all the Jewish people counting the money and people having long noses with a yarmulke and horrendous. And it was a terrible atmosphere. You could smell the fear everywhere. So we rushed home. And in the meantime, before we could get there, there was a big announcement on the tannoy. Could you go now? Could you click? Could you click? Yeah. You see, this is the Star of David, which is a Magen David. And in the middle, it's written Jude, which means Jew in German, Jude. And suddenly they showed everywhere on the great big posters and on the tannoy, every Jew has to wear one of those on their coats. If the Jew is caught without it, they will be or shot on the spot or taken to the concentration camp or locked up because this is a big sin and it is a crime if you don't wear it. And between seeing this and reaching our little flat, my mother decided that we are not going to wear the yellow Star of David because it is basically suicide. It is admitting that you are Jewish. If you wore this Star of David, you were a target. People were encouraged to spit at you, to kick you, to take a stick. You were not allowed to wear on the pavement. You were not allowed into restaurants. You were treated worse than a dog would be treated. So next thing we knew that my mom disappeared and came back about half an hour later. And she had got this white uniform. Could you click now, darling? She reinvented herself. She bought herself this uniform, Red Cross, with a red cross like this. This red cross was like a big emblem, which she put here on the top of her scarf. She had a big, big wooden cross about that size, which she wore. I had a little one, my grandmother had a little one, my auntie had a little one. To tell you the truth, I thought, why would she have such a lot of bigger one than me? But she was bigger and older, so it was fair cops. My grandmother, she was quite religious. She was not very happy about wearing a little cross. Underneath, she had her little Star of David hidden. So after this has happened, we left the flat with my auntie, my grandmother, and the little baby, because if you would live too many of you together in one flat, that would be very suspicious. My mother used to put a bandage around my face, and sometimes she would cut herself and suck out a bit of blood and dab it around, the bandage around my nose, and we walk the streets like that. And anytime she would be stopped, she would say, I am taking this little girl. She never said my daughter. I'm taking this little girl to the hospital. She was injured. And then they would let her go. As we were Jewish and we were hidden, we didn't get any food coupons. We never knew where we would sleep at night safe, or we would have anything to eat. At night, my grandmother and I used to go out scavenging, looking into dustbins behind schools or hospitals or hotels, and my grandma would take out vegetables and things like this that then she would take out. Usually it was potato peelings and bits and pieces of whatever they threw away. She would then wash it and boil it, and that's what we would eat. Our main food that we could get was bread. So sometimes we would be able to get a bit of oil and a bit of garlic. So we would toast the bread with a bit of oil and then rub a bit of garlic on it and hot water. So slowly, there was less and less food. My mother was, which I didn't know at that time, she was working in the underground. So every now and then she would get an address where she and I would go after it became dark, so we could sleep there. And therefore my auntie and my grandma and the little girly baby, they would have a bit of more room there. So my mother and I were sort of refugees, if you like, because we didn't want to jeopardize the other two people's lives. Could you click now, please? Later on, my mom, she did start to get a job in a hospital because her uniform was so real. And when there is such a big war on, people are not choosy. Nobody's looking for the certificate. How, where did you work? Why? You could put a plaster on, you were a doctor, you know. And my mom was stopped in the street with injured people. I was terribly, terribly proud because as far as I'm concerned, one day my mom was a dancing teacher. Now she was a nurse. You know, I didn't know that you had to have experience of what. I just thought, oh, it looks very nice on my mom, this uniform. And when she was working and she was on night duty, I would go with her and she would hide me. And if she would get a room, because if you were working in a hospital and you had a night duty, they would allocate a room for you in a staff room. So if that would happen at least once or twice a week, she did take those jobs because she would get food, because the nurses would get fed. Also, the hospitals were warm. So, and we could have a bath. If nobody looked, we could have a bath. But in order to hide me properly, she would have to take off the cover of the bed, and I would have to pick up the mattress, and I would be face down in spread eagle, my face so that I could breathe. And then she would put on the mattress and the bedding on top of me. And every hour or every two, when she could get out, she would let me go and I could pee in the sink. But then, of course, you had to have lots of water running. Luckily, children's pee don't smell as bad. And you hold it as much as you can, but when you're gonna go, you're gonna go. So, and I could get some food as well, because she would, if the trays would go out, she would fill her pockets with bits and pieces that would be left there. So that was somewhere that she would take me with her. And I was hidden once also in the operating theater in one of the cupboards, because I was so tiny. I was very little for my age. And I also had to trust my mother implicitly, because sometimes there were hours and hours that I would have to be somewhere alone. I never met any other children or other people because I was not allowed to tell them anything, because although I knew that I must be quiet, but at that age I was 6 and 7. So I was always together with my mother, and sometimes when she was on duty, I would have to spend somewhere maybe 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe 6 hours without knowing anybody. So I had to keep busy. And then my mother decided, well, it is not fair on me. Perhaps I would need a little bit of more security. And she went, that's the picture when I was going with her, and she rented a room with a landlady. And obviously we didn't mention about Jewishness because she had her uniform on and she was Hungarian, so she didn't have an accent or anything. And she explained that she is now in a new hospital and that I needed a little bit of security. Oh, she said, what a beautiful child you have, what a beautiful green eyes she has got, and how lovely hair, and you should be so proud of her. Don't worry, I treat her like my own granddaughter. So I got some pencils and paper, and she even bought me some biscuits and hot milk and apples. She was so nice to me, but I didn't talk much. So I was in my room, and after about the third day, without any warning, the door opened wide, and 2 6-foot-something giants, remember I'm tiny, and these 2 men dressed all in black leather. She opened the door and she screeched. Suddenly her voice was not that of a nice, lovely little old lady. Suddenly she screeched, "This is a stinking little Jew that is hiding here. Get rid of her. The air is contaminated. Take her away. Bloody little Jew." And without another word, me, the bloody little stinking Jew, by the way, I smelled myself, I didn't stink at all. Anyway, so they marched me off to a place, the 2 of them. Mind you, they took me into this big limousine. I never sat in a limousine. I didn't know what it was all about. So this great big building, I wrote it was like a big brick building, big things. And we walked up, and all the time, you know, they were just pushing me around, and they had 2 bayonets on them as well. And it was obvious that they didn't take me for a zoo or to a tea party. But I was not even afraid. I just didn't know what was going on. To the innocent, everything is innocent, you see. And then we arrived up on one of the floors, and they kicked the great big door open. And there was this room with about 200-300 people in it. They shoved me through the door, and these people just stopped talking. It was like they didn't know what hit them, neither did I. And suddenly they asked me, "Where is your mom? What is your name? Where do you come from? Which ghetto did you come from? Which neighborhood?" And I told them, "I don't have a mom." "What do you mean you don't have a mom?" Well, I didn't want to tell them anything because I was afraid if I tell them that I have a mom, they would also take her somewhere. So I had nobody. And there was only one more boy in this place there. He was 14 and he had a hunchback and he played chess. So I was then taught with the age of 7.5 how to play chess. I was very talented and I think I was a champion. In my mind I was, so it made me feel better. And every day the soldiers would come in, the SS people, and would count 10, and every 10th person they would take out. They never came back. And then you would hear bang. So many of them were shot downstairs in the yard. And this was a sorting house. I found it out later. This was a so-called sorting house where they collected the Jews, but they didn't know where to put them, in which concentration camp. Some of the people who had a trade, they were obviously put into electrician or carpenter or what. And those who didn't, they were shot or put in a gas chamber. And they didn't know what to do with me because nobody claimed me. And I was just there, a little person who was playing chess. And one day, this chap who was sweeping the floors, he approached me. Now, I found out later that next to this sorting house was an infirmary. You know what an infirmary is, of course. With the school kids, I have to explain it to them. This was a horrible place because they were the people who were basically dying. It was too expensive to give them medication. It is too expensive to shoot them because a bullet was expensive. So in this infirmary, they had beds and beds and beds, and there must have been 50, 60, I don't know how many people starving. They were never moved. They were not fed. But once a week, the sheets were taken away. because they were not toileted either. So these poor people had weed in the bed and had pooed in the back, and they spent there lying in their own excrement. But once a week, those sheets were taken away to be burned. Now, knowing, I didn't know that before, but I was explained it later. So this chap who was cleaning the floors, and he was like a, I don't know, I don't know whether he was Jewish or German or Hungarian, I don't know. But he was every day there, and he was just sweeping the floors and listening. Maybe he was a spy. How do I know? I was 7. Then he approached me and he said to me, "Would you like to see your mother again?" I thought to myself, what a schmuck. Of course I would like to see my mother again. But I said, yes, of course. Don't look at me when you talk to me. He said, look up, look down. Nobody must notice that you are talking to me. He says, I have a message from your mom, and she told me that I can trust you. Now, when the lights go out tonight, because you see, we had to ask the guard if he wanted to go for a pee, we had to ask the guard to go out. You couldn't just go when you wanted to, you had to ask for permission. So she said, you ask the guard whether you could, but when the lights are out, because I think at about 7 o'clock or so, the lights went out. So I went to the guard and asked the guard to let you to the toilet, but don't go into the toilet. There is a door, 3 doors away from the toilet, and you open the door, I'll unlock it. That is the coal cellar. There is the place where we keep the coal to heat the place up. I was going to tell him what heat, but that would have been cheeky. So, and wait there until somebody knocks on the door. Now, can you see this picture? That's how I looked then. So, but I was much thinner, I think, as well. Anyway, so I did that's exactly what he did, what he told me. I opened the door. There was a big, big mountain of coal. I crawled behind it. I was little, to me, it was like Mount Everest. But funnily enough, behind the mount of coal, there was a blanket and there was an apple. So I put the blanket around me, needless to say, it also smelled, but I didn't know that's worse to come. And I ate the apple. This was wonderful. And I was shivering and there was no watch clock. So I didn't know how long it was. And I thought maybe he's another one of those people who just got me here so they can kill me without anybody knowing it. Why did I trust this man after all? I don't know. My mom told me never to trust anybody. But then again, he told me that I could see her. And anyway, the fear that I had there, but still I had a hope that I would see my mom. So I don't know how long after that, there was a knock on the door and I came out and there was this big linen basket in front of the door. As soon as he opened the door, my eyes, it smelled of pneumonia, not pneumonia, ammonia. Pneumonia is what you, no, this is ammonia. And those were the sheets that were taken away from the people in the infirmary. So it was full of pee, full of poo, completely wet, all put in this linen basket to be taken to be burnt because they couldn't wash any of this and that would be expensive. So this went to be burnt. So he made a little space in there, but by the time he said something, my eyes were watering. He said, I'm sorry, he said, it doesn't smell well. You have to hide underneath here. Don't breathe in through your mouth. He says, breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth. If you breathe in through your mouth, you'll choke and you're not allowed to cough. So put your nose very near the side of this basket because there were baskets, because I could breathe a little bit of air. And as we are going down through the main gates, if the people, the soldiers, they have got bayonets and they're poking around to check in those baskets. If he pokes, don't scream, because if he catches you, not only you will get killed, but me too. So he put that over me and I tried. I didn't see anything by that time. And I had to try not to cough. And then I could hear how there are some other little, they had some very, very small wheels on them. I could feel because it was shaking. Then it stopped at the main gates, and just as the man said, they were talking to each other, telling jokes to each other, and in the meantime, somebody was poking with a bayonet, and one of them scratched me here, but I was so brave, I didn't scream and I didn't die. Eventually, I could hear hee-ho, we were all pushed onto the lorry, and I could hear the shaking of all the other little baskets. I couldn't see anything because I was too afraid to peep out. I was not allowed. And after about a few minutes, the lorry stopped. And then somebody, a big man, pulled me out of the stinking linen basket. I couldn't see. I just couldn't see because I was blinded from this urine smell. And he hugged me. He was brave because I don't know how he could even touch me. I stunk. Oh, he says, you're the bravest little girl that I have ever seen in my life. And then he handed it down, and this was in the middle of nowhere. And there was a little shadow, and that little shadow was my mommy. She handed him a bunch of something, it must have been money. And they shook hands. And all he said is to my mother, which I remember, please don't go back to Budapest because there are posters and the SS is looking for you and your little daughter. So go with the first train, whatever you can, not back to Budapest. So we picked up the first train that we possibly could, and we went to Pécs. Pécs is biggest, it's not a town, it's a village, but it's bigger than Budapest. I'm gonna sip a glass of water. We didn't know that the previous day, 6,000 Jews were also killed in the same place. But after a week later, my mother and I were picked up, not because we were Jewish, we were just picked up by the SS and taken to this SS headquarters. And my mother was put in front of into a little room. I had to sit outside to wait for her. And I could see as the door was ajar, that inside the door, it was like quilts. There was a chair there with a light. My mother was told that she has to sit on the chair. And I saw my mom, and I have never seen her shaking and being so pale. But I had to wait, and there was this officer there sitting on a big table, desk, you say, with many, what you call it here, badges on him, you know. And I don't know what made me get up. And there was this picture frame there with two children. And I asked him, I could speak German, but he was a Hungarian SS. So I said to him, are these your children? And then he lifted his head and he looked at me. He had pale blue eyes. You see, you went in and out if they didn't even look at you. So there was no question to this. He was going to question my mother. He was going to torment her, torture her. She was in his torture chamber and he was a torturer. A very nice chap though, you see. So yes, he said, these are my daughters. They must be your age. And I looked him straight in the eye. And I said, are you going to kill my mother? Are you going to torture her? He looked at me. I said, you know, she is the only person that I have in my world. I have nobody else. And my mother didn't do anything. I don't know why we are here. My mother is very nice. And why would you want to hurt my mother? And he just looked at me and he got up from the table. He whacked the desk and he said, Scheiße, which means in German, shit. He beckoned my mother out and looked her in the eye and he said, you should be always very happy with your little, he called me, what angel, not archangel, what is the people who save you, what angel? Somebody who looks after you.
Guardian angel.
Guardian angel, yeah, you see, I can't even speak any language anymore. I get too het up when I remember that. She said, she's your little guardian angel, she says. And believe me, she says, not all of us Germans, he was German actually, who enjoy what we are doing. Now I thought to myself, you could have fooled me, but how could I? I was 8, 7, 7.5, I don't know. So he took his wallet out, gave my mother every bit of paper money that he had. It was quite a nice bundle there, and took us down over corridors, and he must have been a very high-ranking officer, because everybody other officers, soldiers who saw him, they all stopped there, "Hi, Hitler," and he went like that. So he took us down to the main gate and said, "There is the railway station, go across there, take the first train wherever it goes, just take the first train and go." And he says, "Just remember, not all of us are swines and not all of us enjoy it." And he might have mumbled, "God bless you," or something. I don't know. All I know is that Mum and I went for it. Now, you see, this, I don't know what happened to him after, but this chappie has saved our lives. They must have killed him or whatever, but somehow, if I wouldn't have got up and opened my big mouth, he wouldn't even notice that I am there, right? This shows only that in every situation, when you're practically near the guillotines, something will help you, something happens. And this I remembered the rest of the war and the rest of my life, that there is always somebody in the worst situations, so you must never lose hope. Something turns up. Could you do that now? Could you click it? Yes. So what happened then? Then we went back to Budapest to find my grandmother. And in the meantime, my father and my mother's brother, they were taken by the Germans and put in a concentration camp, separated. My father was sent to a salt mine, and he was a concert pianist and he was an architect. And I think he was about 29 or 30 years old. So for 4 years, he was worked to death. I had later on a letter from the German consulate that my dad was worked to death and he died on the spot where he worked. There was no grave. And my whole family, they were all killed, and they don't have graves. But anyway, so then when we went back to Hungary, to Budapest from Pécs, it was terrible. You couldn't go on the streets anymore. You could see people beaten up, and you just had to disappear. So there was this old derelict house with a cellar. So my mother and my grandmother, we decided, I don't know what happened to my aunt in the meantime. We went into this cellar, and there were maybe about another 20 families. And there was no lights, no electricity, because the place was derelict, it was bombed. And they had an air raid shelter, but because it was on the outside derelict, nobody thought that there would be anybody downstairs. So we stayed there for 9 months. We were homeless. For 9 months we stayed there. There was no running water, no food. At night, people had to go, the strongest people from these 20 families. At night, one person would go out and they would just pilfer everything you could find, shops. They would just steal and bring it back, and we would share it all. And I got weaker and weaker and weaker. And by the time I was 9 years old and the war ended, I weighed 3.5 stone. I had no hair. I had pleurisy. I had pneumonia. And one of the people down there, she was a doctor, and she said that I have only 6 months to live. Now, I had only one thing there, which I never said to anybody. I didn't tell you yet. I built a little cocoon around myself. I invented a little cocoon. I invented a little world of my own, and I sang. I didn't know many songs, but if I saw a cloud, I would then make a picture out of it, like a magic, Laterna Magica. I made figures out of the clouds, and I composed songs to it, because I had no toys. We didn't have anything. And we were always afraid, because they were constantly bombing, and we were happy that nobody discovered us. And when my mother went out to find some food, I was always afraid that I would never see her again. And this was a big fear of my life, not to see my mother again. But in this little cocoon, you see, I built that little cocoon around me and I created my own world. When I was hungry, I would sing. When I was afraid, which was always, I would sing. And the rest of the people in the cellar, when I was singing, they always sort of shared an apple with me. So you see, at a very early age, I was singing for my supper already. And then one day, the bombs for a second stopped, but it was all the time bombs, so we didn't even know when the air raid was on because it was constant. And we never dared to get out of the cellar because we were Jewish and we would have been killed. And then suddenly we heard a knock on the walls. And then one brick was taken out and another brick was taken out. And we got absolutely petrified because Budapest was built on catacombs like Rome. So from one cellar, you could go around the whole of Budapest and you would be meeting each other, you know, catacombs. And this hall got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we all huddled together. And my mother and I and my grandmother, we had this little bed that we hid underneath it. And suddenly this hole got big enough for somebody to, you could see this face, red face with a funny hat on it. And they kept on screaming, "Здравствуйте, здравствуйте." Well, that was not Hungarian. It was not German. But my mother could speak Serbian, Slavic, and she said, "I think they are the Russians." And then the hole got bigger and bigger and bigger until it was big enough that this Russian soldier came through. And they were liberated us. But by that time I couldn't walk. And this is how the Russians liberated us. And the rest of Budapest and Hungary was liberated by the Allies, Germans, not Germans, Americans, English, Italian, French, and so on. We went back to Yugoslavia because we got a free passage from the Russians to go back, only to find out that my whole family was murdered. I was the only survivor from the family handler. I was supposed to go back to go to school, but I couldn't. I had to be pushed in a child's pram because they didn't have anything else. And then the kids made fun of me and they spat at me. And because I didn't have hair, so now they didn't spit on me because I was a stinking Jew. I was a walking skeleton and they were afraid of me. So I decided I'm not going to go to school either because I was being bullied and I was supposed to be freed from the Nazis, but these people have been shouting and spitting at me, so it was horrible again. But we got my grandfather's house back, which I inherited, and there was a great big piano there. There was nothing else left, just a piano. And because I had not much to do and I could sing, I started with one finger to play a few of the tunes that I could sing. And that it was one finger, and then it was two fingers, and there was three fingers. Eventually, I could find some accords and I could accompany myself singing. And it didn't matter because I didn't have to walk. My grandmother would put me into the piano chair and off I would go. And it's wonderful. And one day, you see, in summer, we had the windows open. And one day somebody rang the bell and two people came in. And my grandmother was there only with me. And they said, "Who is playing? Who is singing?" Oh, she said, "My poor little granddaughter." She said, she's a victim of the Holocaust. And she can't walk and she can't go to school, but she has got this lovely voice. Could we see her? So these two people came in and they were educators from the government. They were school inspectors. They went to my school to see whether I am in class or school, and they found out that I am truant. I'm not going. They wanted to find out why. Anyway, to cut a long story short, they heard me playing the piano and I got a state scholarship to Montenegro, state scholarship, for which I got 2,500 dinars. And it was free board and lodging and free studying. So by the time I would start, my hair has grown a little bit and I could walk. And this is how my career started. I was playing the piano, learned dancing, and this is what I was in Montenegro. In the meantime, I had to skip things. In the meantime, the law came out that all Jews could live Yugoslavia and not to have to be in a communist state. We could go to Israel. So we then emigrated to Israel, and I learned Hebrew, and it was wonderful. For the first time in my life, I was allowed to be Jewish. And I kept, when I went to the bus the first time, I poked the bus driver on the shoulder, excuse me, I hope you don't mind, are you Jewish? He said, what the bloody hell do you think I am? Of course I'm Jewish. I said, but you're driving a bus. So can you see that man sweeping the road? He is Jewish. And for me, who I came 4 years of hiding and being afraid for my life, being afraid even people to even think about it that I was Jewish, suddenly there were so many Jews and they all admitted it and they were proud of it, of being Jewish. Oh, I kissed the floor. I wanted to be forever in Israel. I really loved it. But my mother had different ideas because she put me, in order to learn in Hebrew, I also had to learn French. So she put me in a French convent school. I was very unhappy about it. Well, whichever it is, later on, we went to Istanbul, and this is me being in a convent school. But as we arrived to Istanbul, my mother was teaching then. She got back to her teaching dancing. She was teaching in the convent school, and that's where I went to. And one day, I think I was 15, the police knocked on the door, and the police said that as I'm over 14, in a Muslim country, you are a grown-up woman, and therefore I would have to have a passport. Well, with 14, I was very far from a grown-up woman, and I couldn't get a passport. If I would pick up the Yugoslav passport, as it is a communist country, they would have sent me back. In Turkey, because it was a Muslim country, if I would give them an Israeli passport, because I could have had an Israeli passport, it would not have been very good either. So they sent me to Germany, because in the meantime, my mother married a German, but this is another story. You can read it in my book, by the way, but plug, everything is in my book. So I went to Germany, and I was learning ballet, and joined a club to play table tennis. I became junior champion in table tennis, and I became a very good ballet dancer. But I had to go back to finish my A-levels, right? But in those days, because I was stateless, I had no passport, no country would accept me. And many people in my age know how it is not to have a passport and not to be able to travel. It's terrible. So one day, there was an advert in the local paper. They're looking for dancers for the Istanbul theater. And I, of course, auditioned for it. And I was accepted. And there on the station in Germany, in Augsburg, there were 12 girls, tickets to Istanbul. I was the smallest, but I was always the smallest. We arrive in Istanbul, we stand on the stage, we had our rehearsals and black leotards. And 11 German girls, 18 years old around. I was only 16. And as we got into the leotards, they looked at me like if I was some kind of a leper. I said, excuse me, why are you looking at me? He said, look at you. I said, yeah. What did you sign up for? I said, why? I am a dancer. Yes, you're a dancer, so are we. But look at you. I said, please stop saying, look at me. I looked at myself, what's wrong? You have no tits. I said, as a ballet dancer, why do I need tits? You have no bum, you have no belly, and you have no tits. No, by that time, I was really upset. I said, I didn't know that you have to have tits for being a ballet dancer. You are not a ballet dancer. We are belly dancers. Belly dancers. No, I was in such a hurry to sign ballet dancer, belly dancer. To me, I didn't see the difference. So they explained to me what it entails, and they felt sorry for me because I started to cry. Because I signed into the school to finish my A-levels. So they filled up a bra which didn't belong to me with cotton wool. And when the tummy was, where you had to do this shaking, they put lots of pearls. So it hit the belly that I never had. And they dressed me up. So when I looked in the mirror, I thought that I was some kind of a naughty girl from Upper Mongolia that was, from a brothel. I looked completely different. They put eyelashes on me. And anyway, So this is where my double life started. This was me during the day as a schoolgirl. Now can you click? And this was me at night as this femme fatale with fishnet stockings, false boobs. Can you do the next one? And this was me as a belly dancer. Can you see all of those, how big knockers they all have? And me there being, she was my best friend and she has the biggest boobs in the troupe. But I was always hiding behind her elbows when we took photographs to hide what I didn't have. And by the time I had long hair, lots of it. And I worked there quite happily in a ballet, and we were belly dancers and we were performing twice a day. And one day on the stage, I was early, there was a mic there with a spotlight. There was nobody in the theater, beautiful little theater. So I said, well, I hope nobody's gonna see me. And I started to sing. I never heard myself through a tannoy or through a loudspeaker. And I was so surprised. I said, bloody hell, I do sound like a proper singer. So I sang my little heart out and I imagined that these empty seats would be all one day full and they would all clap for me. And then suddenly I heard somebody walking up the aisle. Well, let me tell you, my heart almost came out of my mouth because I thought I'm going to lose my job. And I said, oh, I'm terribly sorry. And as this persona came nearer to the stage, I recognized that he was the man who welcomed us when we came to Istanbul. He owned the theater and he clapped. He said, bravo. He said, you got a really good voice. I said, I'm so sorry. He said, no, don't be sorry. Hang on. How would you like to have a little spot every night between the first act and the curtains and then the next act? I said, but I only know 2 songs. Oh, you will learn quickly. So he clapped his hand and somebody came in and he said to him, put in the program, what do you want to be called? I said, call me anything you like. Well, I just put the voice, Dorit sings. And from that day on, I was known as Dorit the voice and not the boobless belly dancer. So I made my name then. And from there on, when I finished my A-levels, I applied to go to university to Munich because I was reading politics, international law, and English, believe it or not. You can speak very good English with an accent, take it from me. So you see, click now, please. You see, this was my double life. During the night, I was with ladies who were speaking all the time about men. And as I was still an innocent little virgin, I had no idea what they were talking about. This I was during the day amongst teenage girls, very, very well-developed teenage girls who were about 16, 17, 18. They were also talking about boys, almost the same subject, but from a different perspective. And I really didn't know where I belonged after that. Could you click? Later on, this was my first record that I made. And in Germany, it was like Eurovision Song Contest. This was in '61. And I was singing this song and I became second. And from there on, could you click again? Once I have been on television, I then became quite overnight, very, very famous. So in Germany, this was a musical. As I was a dancer, I was dancing and singing. I couldn't hear. Somebody said something? Not there. All right. Could you click again, please? This was my first hit in Germany. So now you click it, the song should come.
Okay, I'll play that for you.
And that was my first hit, and they're still playing it. They're still playing it.
Oh yes, das ist Musik. Oh yeah, das ist so schön. Oh yeah, das Lied ist gut. Mir wird kalt, mir wird heiß, das ist gut. Oh yeah, wer tanzt mit mir? Hey boy, wie wär's mit dir? Die Band spielt den Song vom jungen Glück.
can switch it off now, if you like. We can talk, you know.
Right.
Can you still hear me talking? Can you hear me? So this was my first hit. And of course, after that, I was traveling through Europe. I was singing in Lido in Paris. I was in Monte Carlo. And I spent in nightclubs. And so my dream has come true. And I became a singer. And that little cocoon never burst, because every now and then I still use the little cocoon. And then I came to England. I married an Englishman. And singing became secondary, not as much, because I enjoyed having kids. I've got a daughter and a son. Now I have got 5 grandchildren. But in a later date, I decided to write a book, and I became a public speaker. And I have written the book From Yellow Star to Pop Star, and also Behind the Smile. I have lately, last year, brought out a CD called Dorit Oliver Sings, that is on boot camp. And now, of course, I have dedicated the rest of my life to share my life. I mean, it is not forgotten. I would be lying to you. But life is for living. And you can never say, oh, I wait tomorrow, perhaps I can repeat and do tomorrow what I could have done today. That's rubbish. You can never do it. You must do it today. Today is today, and that is reality. And we had to learn about people. When we sit in the class or in a cinema or anywhere against somebody next door, you think about it. Maybe what is this person all about? Maybe they have got a different color, maybe different religion. Oh, I don't want to sit next to them. They don't look nice. Why? Maybe they don't want to sit next to you. What do you know about them? So in order to have a harmonious future, because we are now a melting pot, and that's the only way that anybody will have a future, to assimilate and to accept different people, and to understand that in this world, there is not them and us, it's all us. In the moment that we all realize it is all about us, so whatever happens now in Uzbekistan or wherever, it is far away. I can't feel it physically, but we should feel for it, because tomorrow it is us here. So understand that the world, that we are interactive with each other. And the young people have to be educated as soon as possible to understand that it is not a terrible thing to be Jewish and then you have to kill all the Jews and hate them. It is not wrong to be Muslim or to be Catholic or to be a Buddhist. That doesn't matter. If you believe in God, if there is God and you believe in it, think about religion that we are communicating in a different language. Some speak German, that's a religion. Think the language that we know, and we pray, if we pray. It is just the same thing, except in a different language. And if you learn how to live together, there is plenty of space. There's plenty. If we all have too much, we can share it. And above all, to understand that everybody has got the same right for life and living. And the reason that I'm sharing it with you, I felt terribly persecuted. I didn't understand what Judaism was. All I know is if you wear the yellow star, that you're Jewish, and people can kill you. And people can say terrible things about you. And I just didn't, and today I am many years old, chronologically. I don't think I ever really grew up somehow. I got wrinkles. But some of the things you just cannot forget. And some people don't even know about it. So I am privileged to be invited to different schools and to different societies, because it's easy to read something. They say, oh, that's crap. It's not true. They have just written about it. But I can promise you, whatever I tell you, I've been there, seen it, done it. So it is a privilege to be invited. And those kids in schools and most of the teachers are absolutely amazing because they're all dedicated. And I would like to thank you very much for inviting me so that I can share my experience with you. And now you can ask me questions, whatever you like, and I will try to respond to it as good as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorit. I think everyone will agree that that was an incredible talk. And thank you for sharing such intimate details with us. Absolutely amazing life. So if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, or you can raise your hand. I think to begin, I would like to ask you a question about your relationship with your mother. In the book, you talk about her a lot and how brave and resourceful she was in terms of how she kind of went from job to job and went to different places during the war to help you survive. I was just wondering if you could comment a little bit on your relationship and your closeness, and also how she coped with her experiences of the Holocaust. I know obviously you had singing as a coping mechanism. So after the war, how did your mum feel about talking in public about her experiences? Was she quite open about it?
I suppose as a child, she treated it more or less, she treated me like a comrade, because with that I was very, very flattered. We talked about things, she invented things, she made a game out of things, because she said, this is a hide and seek. Today we are hiding, she didn't say from the Nazis, but we are just hiding. And sometimes when she went to work, then she said, you have to hide here. And then when she came back 2 hours later, oh, she found me. So she made a game out of this. And she was very young and very resilient, and she was very, very brave. I don't know where she got those things from, but she was quite amazing and very inventive. And she never showed me when she was afraid. And later on, you see, I just didn't know that she was working in the underground. And all I know that we would go with a Red Cross, white Red Cross van, she and somebody, another man who pretended to be a doctor, and they had a white uniform, sort of like a doctor with stethoscope. And we had a Swiss flag in front of the car, and we would go into a ghetto where there were the Jewish children, and my mother showed them some kind of a paper and said that the Swiss consulate is demanding to take out so many children. And of course, sometimes 20, 30 children would get into the little van, and we would drive to the Swiss consulate. And she saved many, many, many children, because I cannot count because I was only little then. But I do know that she was, we made these similar journeys to many, many other places. And so that was one of the things. And later on, what she was, as I said, when we went back to Yugoslavia, she then again got in charge with the juvenile delinquents, because after the war, well, during the war, the young people between 12 and 14, 15, the young, especially the young boys and young girls, in order to keep their families going, they were robbing, they were doing all sorts of things just in order to be able to keep their families. But they were little heroes because they kept their families. But after the war, they became juvenile delinquents, because what was okay during the war, you could be a hero because you broke in to find some food. But if you did it straight after the war, then you were a little bastard because you were a thief. So you were then put into juvenile prison. So my mother got these kids together. Instead of being in the prison, she got them out of about 60 or 70 of them out of a prison. And she created a choir and the singing and the dancing group. In that time, it was straight after the war, 47 or something like this it was. And then Bulgaria, they had plenty of food because they didn't have a fight with Germany. So, and I was, of course, part of the troop because I was everywhere. I was a little on all. And my mother, instead of having those youngsters, teenagers, the juveniles in juvenile prisons, she created a choir and a dance troupe, and we went to Bulgaria and we were performing with for different schools in Bulgaria. and we got plenty of food. And those very boys who were juvenile delinquents, she put them in charge of the rest of them. So they had their own law. And if somebody did something, they had to judge whether the person deserved to win, what kind of a punishment they would get. So that was she did always very, very good. And then when we went to Israel, she just heard that they delivered a plane full of children who were tortured by Dr. Mengele. You heard of Dr. Mengele? And they were about, I don't know, 50, 60 children. They were in the teens already then, and they were put into sanatorium in Israel. And my mother volunteered to work with them. And she was even then, the first thing is that she told everybody that they're not going to wear white overalls, because as soon as the kids saw somebody in a white overalls, they got a fit. They started to scream and shout, and they were frightened. They were petrified, because the very people who had the white overalls did all those tests on them. So my mother suggested everybody came in jeans and in private clothes. And that worked very, very wonderful, because the children suddenly relaxed. And when those children were there for about a couple of whenever, my mother then decided to make a degree in child psychology. So then she became a child psychologist. And anyway, we traveled. And then eventually, when I went to university in Germany, she joined me and she got a job. And eventually she worked for the United Nations in Italy. And she was always involved with the children's charities. And later on, she followed me to England, and here she had a school. She specialized in children with learning difficulties. And as far as my mother, she was my war comrade. I would like to have had a mother, but she was not my mother. She was my war comrade with whom we had survived so many things. And for her, the war never really ended, sadly. I think when my mother died, she died here. Unfortunately, life is not very fair, because she had Alzheimer's on the end. Lucky for her, she didn't know it. And it is any of the people who have got dementia or Alzheimer's, to use luck would be frivolous. But if you understand the way I see it, they don't know. It is only the families and the relatives who love them. They suffer because they see them, but they don't see themselves. And sadly, but the moment my mom shut her eyes and I was there, and she's the only person, and I'm the only person who have had I could say the privilege to be there then if one of us died, because all of our relatives died somewhere tortured or killed or murdered. And she was the first person that I was there. I have no idea when my grandmother is and my father was. So when she died, it was the first person that I could look in the eye, and we were holding hands. And this is when the war ended for my mum, because the war and the Holocaust and all those memories, they never ended for my mother. Because I was a child, much of it, no, not anymore. Part of it, I'm still a child, perhaps I'm lucky. But many parts of it is, I don't think my own children realize what I went through. Because yes, I spoke about it, especially when they left some food. I got very upset. And I said, you can't leave food, you have to eat. And of course, I would eat everything they left. So I blew up, I became really big. And one day my son said to me, Mommy, just because you eat all the food, the children in Biafra are still starving. So I stopped eating the leftovers. But coming to that, you see, you pass on to your children. Some of it you don't want to pass on but it changes you. Your personality changes in a way that you don't really realize it. If you would see it in somebody else, perhaps you wouldn't like it. But you don't see your own reactions. You cannot really, there's certain hang-ups that you have, that unless people really, how do they say, I love you with warts and all. Is that what they say? Well, I don't have many warts outside, but I'm sure that on the inside I am full of warts. And I just have a few very, very good friends. Hillary is one of them, who love me with warts and all. But I suppose that for my own children, it must be quite difficult, because maybe they see things that I hope they would never see. I don't know, but I'm here, and I hope I can still survive the coronavirus a little bit, because it would be so unfair. Hitler didn't kill me, and the bloody coronavirus would, so I would just rather be left alone. Anyway, I'm talking, but I feel very privileged to be able, oh, hang on, before you go away, you must show this to everybody. Hang on, hang on, hang on. Unfortunately, I have no possibility to wear it anywhere. This is my medal. Can you see it all?
Yeah, so actually we have a question about the medal. We just wanted
But
to know,
I can't wear it anywhere.
how did it feel when you received the medal? It's a question from
I had to pinch myself to say, does it really happen to me? I didn't do all those things because I knew one day I would get a medal. I never thought I would get a medal for this. I thought I would have to do something amazing. It felt somehow a big, big honor. It almost felt like, yes, I have done this, but I'm going to medal, so I'm not going to cry what happened. Like very, very honored, very wonderful. And I'm glad enough to still survive, and it was not just put on my grave.
Yeah, it's really incredible. So we have a couple of more questions, if that's okay.
Please, please.
Comfortable to ask them yet? So a question from Imogen. She says, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was really an inspiration. How did it feel when you were studying and performing in Germany after everything that had happened to you and your family because of the Nazi regime? Were you nervous about being Jewish and living in Germany after the war? Or did you feel a bit more comfortable knowing?
Yes, but there is, not being Jewish, it's very few people. Do you know the expression dafke? You know the expression dafke? The expression, anybody Jewish amongst you? Nobody? After speaking to me for an hour, you become Jewish in a minute. Just wait. Dafke means that in spite of, I spite you. I do this just to piss you off. That's English enough, yes? I went to Germany because I want to see how they would react to me. I wanted to look in the eye to those people whose father or grandfather or brother or whatever has done what they have done. I didn't just want to hate people, not knowing. I felt very uncomfortable. Anything that was German, I didn't want to talk to them. And then when my mother married this German, I thought I wanted to kill him. And when we would have a meal, I would stare at him. And my mother would say, darling, it's very rude to look at somebody like this. I said, I'm not looking at him. I'm murdering the bastard. She said, what do you mean? Well, if I look at him and I think, die, 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 he's got to die sometimes. But it worked out to be that eventually he became my best friend. And I realized that it's not his fault that he was born German. And this is why I'm trying to tell people, just by knowing something and they have got a reputation, you can't hate them or dislike them. And as my mother married him and I hated her so much, I got a big punishment because when I was in Germany, the first young man I fell madly in love with, he was German. And I would regularly stand in front of the mirror and spit on the mirror in my own eyes. I said, you stinking Jew, how dare you be in love with a German? After all, how do you know how many? But you can't do that. If you fall in love, you fall in love. It's just there. And what nationality or what color or what gender that person is, you don't choose. It is just there. The eros is hitting the thingy on you and that's it. So that taught me a lot of tolerance. And the fact that they made me into a star, because I hope it was not only as a guilt, but I did have a good voice and I was pretty good looking too. And it was really very amazing that out of everywhere, it was Germany who recognized my artistic values. And that I was Jewish as well, to me, it was a bonus. And for them, perhaps a little bit, the bad conscience was massaged a bit of, I don't know. I liked Germany, it was nice, but I couldn't live there with good conscience, but I loved it. They cook very well, they like culture, and that is a discrepancy. How could such intelligent, well-educated people become mass murderers? You see, this is another enigma. How is that possible? They were not primitives, right? They were well-educated people, and yet the more educated they were, they found a better way of killing. Your turn. Come on, ask questions when I'm here. Come on, Alex. You look so pensive. Why don't you ask something? I can't hear a word. I can't hear anything. Hannah, I can't hear him.
Yeah, I think he's
Hello.
unmuting.
No. I have 1% of battery. I hope it's not turning off.
Where are you coming from?
Italy.
Parliamo italiano, non fa niente.
I hope so. I hope she arrives. No, I studied. I've just finished today my master's in Holocaust studies in Israel. So it's a pleasure to hear from you.
You understood everything?
Sorry?
You understood what I said? E capisci che dico?
Sì, possiamo parlare in italiano.
Un poco. Mi piace Italia, mi piace molto.
Yeah.
So
Lovely.
we had a couple more questions.
Yes.
One, did you experience any anti-Semitism after the war, and either during or in your later career? And also, you seem to bring your successful music career to quite an abrupt end when you came to England. Did you kind of consider carrying on your career once you'd settled in England, or was it kind of?
In England, when I came back, I did do still a little bit of singing. I got involved very much in charity work, and we moved down to Eastbourne because it was for my children then better than living in London, because I spent half of my life being a chauffeur from one school to the other. And we came to Eastbourne and I opened a boutique, and for very fashionable clothes and jewelry. I traveled all around, and I have created fashion shows and God knows what. And my husband also said it's cheaper if you have a boutique because you can buy your clothes wholesale. So it was 2 for the shop, 1 for me. I'm still wearing the clothes from then. Eventually, I had found a couple of very anti-Semitic remarks in the shop. And there was a lady there, and then she, by the way, I have an accent, but I picked up swearing very quickly. And people, and because some of the meanings I didn't know, but they sounded very musical. And this was an old lady who came in, and she started to make anti-Semitic remarks. And I picked her up by the scruff of her neck and threw her on the street. And it was wonderful. Go back to where you came from. I said, you are standing on my ground. I pay the rent here. And so some people make anti-Semitic remarks. And through appearing in show business, you learn how to stop people heckling. And sometimes when I go to school, there's little smart asses who are trying to heckle you. And very often teachers come say, let me deal with it. I said, please don't, darling. I said, I have been heckled with much better people, and I made them crawl out of the nightclub. Just leave them to me. But on the lot, the kids have been wonderful in schools. When I find an anti-Semitic, I don't think many people would dare at the moment face to face to be anti-Semitic to me. And because I don't know, all I'm saying is now, it's sad because the anti-Semitism is growing again. This and anti-that is quite catching because somebody is always anti-something, right? And people always, if they want to feel better, They feel that they have to spit on somebody or stand on somebody or kick somebody because that will elevate them and they would feel better. People have to realize life doesn't work like that. Now it's you to ask me questions. I talk like a book for England. Now you ask me questions, please.
Has anybody got any more questions for Dorit? If you'd like to just ask.
There is no such thing. There are people who must ask, would like, sorry, they want to know something. Denise Anesta, why don't you ask me something? You look like a person who would like to hear something.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your speech. Already I forced my boyfriend to ask question. So he already asked about the post-war anti-Semitism. But I was wondering, so you went basically through the whole Europe, your whole journey. So which country you are considering to be your home? Or are you having a heart in many countries?
I came to England because England, to me, at that time, was very free. I liked the way that they educated children. And I also found, because it is fairly multicultural, the ethos of education in the English schools, I think, is second to none. That's why everybody all over the world send their children to English schools. And also they're very tolerant with foreign people. When I was in Germany, when you live next door to somebody, they knew how many teeth, everybody knew everything. Nobody respected your privacy. If you sneezed, next door neighbor would say Gesundheit. Here, if you sneeze, you can drop dead, nobody is going to ask you for it. So that's another thing about it. But people respect your privacy. And for me, that is very, very important. And people are also very tolerant. In England, basically, to other nations that I have traveled a lot, I think the British people are very tolerant with foreign people. But when they look at their ancestors, the grandmother and this, everybody is a bit foreign. Yeah. We are all foreigners. And yet we are all home together because the world is our home. We happen to like England.
Do you think you would have stayed in Israel if it hadn't been for your mum? Because you seem, in the book, you describe being very happy in Israel and you really felt like it was a kind of a paradise for Jews, right, after the war. Do you think you would have stayed there if it hadn't been?
Oh, God, yes. God, yes. I would have loved. Even now, I keep on thinking, when I kick the bucket, would I like to sort of die there? My grandmother, my mother's mother, her big wish was to die in Aretz. Aretz is Aretz Israel, which was, the Israel. And she died, unfortunately, and she was buried in Israel. So her wish comes through. I don't quite want to die yet. I want a little bit longer to be able to meet people and talk to people. And I want my other books out. And, but Israel, in many ways, is quite amazing. And every time I hear something nasty being said about Israel, I really get very upset about it. Because at least they have got somewhere to go, somewhere. And look, they have made miraculous from the sand, from the Sahara. They made orange groves. Why don't they bloody well leave them to be? Why is everybody just picking on that little land? And anyway, we're not going to go into politics because I promised not to talk about politics, but I would like to go to Israel.
Okay, so we have another question. Have you noticed any kind of change in terms of interest or knowledge about the Holocaust in more recent years when you've been speaking? And also, what do you think about the increase again in Holocaust denial in recent years?
The people, you see, when there is a saying in Germany, wenn den Esel zu gut geht, geht Eis tanzen. If the donkey has got a perfect life, it goes ice skating. When it ice skates, it breaks its legs or its necks. But it is challenged because he has nothing else to think about. Now, humanity at the moment, despite of all these terrible pandemics and wars and everything, The 70s and the 80s were wonderful. This was the best time anybody could have. I used to be a flower power girl. I used to have flowers painted on and I used to go around with long skirts, and oh, it was wonderful. I didn't smoke pot. My son smoked much later, but that's neither here or there. It's nothing. It doesn't do. It stinks the place up, and it's expensive. Unless you got arthritis, it's good for your hands, but you can't even hold a cigarette when you got arthritis. So what do you do? Anyway, so people are bored because they have nothing terrible. They don't have to go out and worry what they're going to eat tomorrow or how they're going to pay rent. They are now anti-Semitic because they again think, look, Israel is so happy and we are not. People in Israel work, people sacrifice their life. If you sit on your toches, which is bottom in Hebrew, then you expect other people to pay for you. If you're going to another country, especially if you're an immigrant, nobody can stop you from working. Why don't you work? I worked when I came here. So those people blame everybody else. I am an immigrant, second generation immigrant, and I'm very happy to be here and I assimilated. And anybody who is allowed to come to England should feel the same way. Did I say the wrong things?
No, absolutely. And, you know, we're extremely lucky to have you in England.
I found that the kids in schools and the teachers, we have become best friends. I'm very outspoken. And some people might get shocked, but do I care? I'm sorry. You ask me a question, I will tell you. You don't want to know, don't ask me.
That's wonderful. Well, I think we'll draw it to a close there, because we've kept you for quite a long time, Dorit. It's been amazing. You have a wonderful sense of humor, and we've all absolutely loved hearing you and hearing about your amazing life. Like we said, if anybody has any questions that come to them later, you can just drop us an email and we'll forward it on to Dorit and she'll get back to you. Also, like we said, if you want to buy her book, get a signed copy. If
you buy my book, you will know so much because it's impossible. And this is not a plug, but it is really part of history.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I even read it sometimes. I read something and I thought, good God, did it really happen to me? And much more has happened, but it was not possible to print. Not naughty things, but I mean, life in itself. You were a lovely, lovely audience. And if you feel that you were not able to ask me now this, I'm glad that Alex was not too shy. You can write to Hannah and she's going to send me then the questions and I will then answer them.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
That's perfect. Yeah, that's perfect. So a big thank you, Dorit. I think everybody's been really impressed. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll send you something as well. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody. Have great holidays.
Yes, happy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Happy Christmas to everybody.